Hey everybody, this is Ryan McClanahan with HistoryThroughCards.com. I hope you're all doing very well today. Quite recently, I found a really interesting and quite beautiful set called the 1909-1912 T53 Cowboy Series, issued by the American Tobacco Company, inserted into their Hassan cork tip cigarettes. And I really want to do a deep dive into this. I wanted to find out more about the Hassan cork tip cigarette brand and really everything about this set. So I picked up 3 of these cards, as you guys can see here. The Hassan cork tip cigarette brand itself, sometimes it's really difficult to find a production date for these brands from American Tobacco, and an end date as well is really difficult. The earliest I could find for a production date was October 24th, 1904, and actually this does make sense because American Tobacco Company reorganized, I believe, on October 16th, 1904. The last date I could find for this brand was June of 1916, and this also really kind of makes sense too. The back of these, as you guys can see here, it says the Oriental Smoke, but the thing is that this is a Turkish blend, and a lot of the tobacco was being or coming from Turkey during World War One. Turkey closed its borders to the United States. We couldn't get any products from Turkey. Now, America declared war on Germany in 1917, and the Lusitania was torpedoed in 1915. Now, those 2 dates really kind of, something doesn't really add up there as to why we entered World War One. Full 2 years. It's a different story altogether. But in the meantime, the Lusitania happens in 1915, and then we can't get products from Turkey in 1916, because that looks like the end date for this particular brand. It could be a fluke, but I don't really see a whole lot during 1916, 17, or 18 in terms of Turkish cigarettes or tobacco that we're importing. So you make of that what you will, but I don't see anything after 1916 for this brand. So I don't think it actually continued after that date in June of 16. That being said, though, that the cork tip itself, I've heard that it dislodged into smokers' mouths, and so a lot of brands from the American Tobacco Company actually had a mouthpiece instead. And so I've never smoked, so I couldn't tell you firsthand, but I thought that was kind of interesting. And as I'm going through some of the artwork here for this particular set, it is a set of 50 cards, and they are quite affordable for the average collector. I picked up these cards for about $10 a piece. You could probably get them for a little bit less than that, but I don't think that a 50 card set is unobtainable. I think you guys can complete this set. It may take a little bit of time because you are dealing with a set that is over 100 years old, but the artwork is really amazing in this set, and I'll get into that in a minute. But the date itself for issuance, 1909 through 1912, I kind of have a problem with this. The 1911 and 1912 dates, I have a problem more with the 1909 and 1910. We actually don't know when the set was exactly issued, because for every set that the American Tobacco Company issued, there was a ledger, and I believe the American Lithograph Company held those ledgers, or the American Lithograph Company sent those ledgers to the American Tobacco Company, which that, okay, fine, if that happened, sure. But that would also kind of make sense too for the American Tobacco Company to have ledgers. We do actually have ledgers, in fact, for not for every set, but we know that they existed for every set. They have the exact date of issuance and how many cards to put in a pack and when that issuance was to end, and for another set of cards to be issued in packs. So we do have some of those, and I think some of them are actually baseball related too, and non-sports related. I just haven't seen a lithograph ledger or American Litho ledger for the Cowboy Series. The artwork is really amazing, and I think it's a selling point for the set. Obviously, uh, you're dealing with artwork that I think in the back of this kind of explains. In this run right here, it says his favorite brand. That's really interesting. Obviously, the cowboy here is holding up a Hassan cigarette pack, and on the back of it, I'm going to read what it says. Among men who do hard work in the open, most of them find smoking an antidote to fatigue. Frederic Remington writes of a hunting party from a ranch that had to turn back because the tobacco had given out. A supply of something to smoke is as much a necessity of a cowboy's outfit as a good saddle and bridle. The first cowboys were the Mexican vaqueros, who were inveterate cigarette smokers, partly getting the habit from their Mexican predecessors, partly because they seldom had time to enjoy a longer smoke. The American cowpunchers have always been great consumers and expert makers of cigarettes. A favorite cowboy trick was to roll a cigarette with one hand. Since the Hassan has been put on the market, the cowboys, like smokers everywhere, have recognized the fine quality of this low-priced brand. They no longer have the trouble of making their own cigarettes when such good ones may be bought cheaply. Guys, just so you know, the text on the back of these cards is very hard to read, but I did see something very interesting, and that was the name Frederic Remington. And I was like, I know that name. And I put two and two together, and he's one of the foremost illustrators of the Wild West, the Old West, cowboys and Indians, as really what he's known for. And so it makes sense that they would actually have his name on the back. Actually, I was kind of shocked when I first read that. I'm very familiar with Frederic Remington's work, and he passed away in December of 1909, I believe December 26th. And so that's really where the dating of the T53, for me, it's kind of problematic. Uh, these easily could have been Frederic Remington's work. It's quite possibly it is. The again, like the 1911 and 1912 dating, to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense here, especially in 1912. But 1909, I really don't have much of a problem with that date. Again, we don't have any American lithograph ledgers or American Tobacco Company ledgers to specifically state when these cards were first issued into packs, or when they were taken out of packs and the series was ended. Again, it's a 50 card set that is fairly affordable for the average collector, meaning that you guys could, if you wanted to, complete a set, and it's going to take you some time, but it's not going to break the bank. What I found out really kind of interesting here too is that I think that these were from lithograph portraits that he did for American Lithograph Company, and so that wouldn't be unusual for the time either. So Maxfield Parrish, he I think was one of the first artists to have lithograph done for his artwork at the time, and so everybody could afford, or if they wanted to, they could get a lithograph of Maxfield Parrish's work, as you guys can see here. And then later on, J.C. Leyendecker, he also is very famous for having a lot of lithograph prints done of his work. And so he's actually more well known for the Saturday Evening Post covers than anything else, but he's also very well known for Arrow collars as well. So you guys can find a lot of his work, and both these guys, Maxfield Parrish and J.C. Leyendecker, as well as Frederic Remington, are very well known. And Frederic Remington's lithograph prints can be found throughout the 1940s and 50s and even the 1970s as well. So you can find his lithograph prints going back, I think, from like 1909, 1908. I saw a few of those, and those are actually kind of affordable as well. The other two guys, Maxfield Parrish and J.C. Leyendecker, they they might set you back a little bit, but for the most part, maybe like $100 or so, you guys can pick up original lithograph prints from the 1910s for these guys. Anyway, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about Frederic Remington and his work, and I found a really nice bio that I think you guys are going to enjoy. So here we go. This is from fredericriemington.org. Frederic Remington, biography and details, early life. Frederic Remington was born in Canton, New York in 1861 to Seth Pierpont Remington and Clarissa Bascom Sackrider, whose family owned hardware stores and immigrated from Alsace-Lorraine in the early 1700s. Remington's father was a colonel in the Civil War, whose family arrived in the United States from England in 1637. He was a newspaper editor and postmaster, and the family was active in local politics and staunchly Republican. One of Remington's great-grandfathers, Samuel Baxham, was a saddle maker by trade, and the Remingtons were fine horsemen. Frederic Remington was related by family bloodlines to Indian portrait artist George Catlin and cowboy sculptor Earl W. Bascom. Colonel Remington was always away at war during most of the first 4 years of his son's life. After the war, he moved his family to Bloomington, Illinois for a brief time and was appointed editor of the Bloomington Republican, but the family returned to Canton in 1867. Remington was the only child of the marriage and received constant attention and approval. He was an active child, large and strong for his age, who loved to hunt, swim, ride, and go camping. He was a poor student, though, particularly in math, which did not bode well for his father's ambitions for his son to attend West Point. He began to make drawings and sketches of soldiers and cowboys at an early age. The family moved to Ogdensburg, New York, when Remington was 11, and he attended Vermont Episcopal Institute, a church-run military school where his father hoped discipline would rein in his son's lack of focus and perhaps lead to a military career. Remington took his first drawing lessons at the institute. He then transferred to another military school where his classmates found the young Remington to be a pleasant fellow, a bit careless and lazy, good-humored, and generous of spirit, but definitely not soldier material. He enjoyed making caricatures and silhouettes of his classmates. At 16, he wrote to his uncle of his modest ambitions, quote, "I never intend to do any great amount of labor. I have but one short life, and do not aspire to wealth or fame in a degree which could only be obtained by an extraordinary effort on my part, unquote. He imagined a career for himself as a journalist, with art as a sideline. Remington attended the art school at Yale University, the only male in his freshman year. However, he found that football and boxing were more interesting than the formal art training, particularly drawing from casts and still life objects. He preferred action drawing, and his first published illustration was a cartoon of a bandaged football player for the student newspaper Yale Current. Though he was not a star player, his participation on the strong Yale football team was a great source of pride for Remington and his family. He left Yale in 1879 to tend to his ailing father, who had tuberculosis. His father died a year later, at age 46, receiving respectful recognition from the citizens of Ogdenburg. Remington's uncle Mart secured a good-paying clerical job for his nephew in Albany, New York, and Remington would return home on weekends to see his girlfriend, Eva Caton. After the rejection of his engagement proposal to Eva by her father, Remington became a reporter for his Uncle Mart's newspaper, then went on to other short-lived jobs. Living off his inheritance and modest work income, Remington refused to go back to art school and instead spent time camping and enjoying himself. At 19, he made his first trip west, going to Montana, at first to buy a cattle operation, then a mining interest, but realized he did not have sufficient capital for either. In the Old West of 1881, he saw the vast prairies, the quickly shrinking buffalo herds, the still unfenced cattle, and the last major confrontations of U.S. cavalry and Native American tribes, scenes he had imagined since his childhood. Though the trip was undertaken as a lark, it gave Remington a more authentic view of the West than some of his later artists and writers who followed in his footsteps, such as N.C. Wyeth and Zane Grey, who arrived 25 years later when the Old West had slipped into history. From that first trip, Harper's Weekly published Remington's first published commercial effort, a redrawing of a quick sketch on wrapped paper that he had mailed back east. And that's what actually I think these portraits are here. But anyway, let's continue. In 1883, Remington went to Peabody, Kansas, to try his hand at the booming sheep ranching and wool trade. As one of the holiday stockmen, rich young Easterners out to make a quick killing as ranch owners, he invested his entire inheritance, but Remington found ranching to be a rough, boring, isolated occupation which deprived him of the finer things of Eastern life, and the real ranchers thought him a lazy playboy. Remington continued sketching, but at this point his results were cartoonish and amateurish. After less than a year, he sold his ranch and went home. After acquiring more capital from his mother, he returned to Kansas City to start a hardware business, but due to an alleged swindle, it failed, and he reinvested his remaining money as a silent half-owner of a saloon. He went home to marry Eva Caton in 1884, and they returned to Kansas City immediately. She was unhappy with his saloon life and was unimpressed by the sketches of saloon inhabitants that Remington regularly showed her. When his real occupation became known, she left her husband and returned to Groversville. With his wife gone and with business doing badly, Remington started to sketch and paint in earnest and bartered his sketches for essentials. He soon had enough success selling his paintings to locals to see art as a real profession. Remington returned home again, his inheritance gone, but his faith in his new career secured. Reunited with his wife and moved to Brooklyn, he began studies at the Art Students League of New York and sufficiently bolstered his fresh, though still rough, technique. His timing was excellent as newspaper interests in the dying West was escalating. He submitted illustrations, sketches, and other works for publication with Western themes to Collier's and Harper's Weekly, as his recent Western experiences, highly exaggerated, and the hearty, breezy cowboy demeanor gained him credibility with the Eastern publishers looking for authenticity. His first full-page cover under his own name appeared in Harper's Weekly on January 9th, 1886, when he was 25. With financial backing from his Uncle Bill, Remington was able to pursue his art career and support his wife. Early career. In 1886, Remington was sent to Arizona by Harper's Weekly on a commission as an artist correspondent to cover the government's war against Geronimo. Although he never caught up with Geronimo, Remington did acquire many authentic artifacts to be used later as props, and made many photos and sketches valuable for later paintings. He also made notes on the true colors of the West, such as, quote, shadows of horses should be a cool carmine and blue, unquote, to supplement the black and white photos. Ironically, art critics later criticized his palette as primitive and unnatural, even though it was based on actual observation. After returning back east, Remington was sent by Harper's Weekly to cover the Charleston, South Carolina earthquake of 1886. To expand his commission work, he also began doing drawings for Outing magazine. His first year as a commercial artist had been successful, earning Remington $1,200, almost triple that of the typical teacher. He had found his life's work and bragged to a friend, quote, that's a pretty good break for an ex-cowpuncher to come to New York with USD 30 and catch on at art. For commercial reproduction in black and white, he produced ink and wash drawings. As he added watercolor, he began to sell his work in art exhibitions. His works were selling well, but garnered no prizes, as the competition was strong, and masters like Winslow Homer and Eastman Johnson were considered his superiors. A trip to Canada in 1887 produced illustrations of the Blackfeet, the Crows, and the Canadian Mounties, eagerly enjoyed by the reading public. Later that year, Remington received a commission to do 83 illustrations for a book by Theodore Roosevelt, Ranch Life and the Hunting Trail, to be serialized in the Century magazine before publication. The 25-year-old Roosevelt had a similar Western adventure to Remington, losing money on a ranch in North Dakota the previous year, but gaining experience which made him an quote-unquote expert on the West. The assignment gave Remington's career a big boost and forged a lifelong connection with Roosevelt. His full-color oil painting, Return of the Blackfoot War Party, was exhibited at the National Academy of Design, and the New York Herald commented that Remington would one day be listed among the great American painters. Although not admired by all critics, Remington's work was deemed distinctive and modern. By now, he was demonstrating the ability to handle complex compositions with ease, as in Mule Train Crossing the Sierras, 1888, and to show action from all points of view. His status as the new trendsetter in Western art was solidified in 1889 when he won a second-class medal at the Paris Exposition. He had been selected by the American Committee to represent American painting over Albert Bierstadt, whose majestic large-scale landscape peopled with tiny figures of pioneers and Indians was now considered passé. Around this time, Remington made a gentleman's agreement with Harper's Weekly, giving the magazine an informal first option on his output, but maintaining Remington's independence to sell elsewhere if desired. As a bonus, the magazine launched a massive promotional campaign for Remington, stating that he draws what he knows, and he knows what he draws. Although laced with blatant puffery, common for the time, claiming that Remington was a bona fide cowboy and Indian scout, the effect of the campaign was to raise Remington to the equal of the era's top illustrators, Howard Pyle and Charles Dana Gibson. His first one-man show in 1890 presented 21 paintings of the American art galleries and was well received. With success all but assured, Remington became established in society. His personality, his pseudo-cowboy speaking manner, and Wild West reputation were strong social attractions. His biography falsely promoted some of the myths he encouraged about his Western experiences. Remington's regular attendance at celebrity banquets and stag dinners, however, though helpful to his career, fostered prodigious eating and drinking, which caused his girth to expand alarmingly. Obesity became a constant problem for him from then on. Among his urban friends and fellow artists, he was a man among men, a deuce of a good fellow, but notable because he fictitiously never drew but 2 women in his life, and they were failures, not counting Indian women. In 1890, Remington moved to posh New Rochelle, New York, to his new estate, Edion, in order to have both more living space and extensive studio facilities, and also with the hope of gaining more exercise, mature career. Remington's fame made him a favorite of the Western Army officers fighting the last Indian battles. He was invited out west to make their portraits in the field and to gain them national publicity through Remington's articles and illustrations for Harper's Weekly, particularly General Nelson Miles, an Indian fighter who aspired to the presidency of the United States. In turn, Remington got exclusive access to the soldiers and their stories and boosted his reputation with the reading public as the soldier artist. Remington arrived on scene just after the massacre at Wounded Knee, in which over 300 Sioux were slaughtered, and which he reported it as the Sioux outbreak in North Dakota, praising the Army's heroic actions in dealing with the Indians. Some of the Miles paintings are monochromatic and have an almost you-are-there photographic quality, heightening the realism as in the Parley 1898. Remington's self-portrait on a horse, 1890, shows the artist as he wished he was, not the pot-bellied Easterner weighing heavily on a horse, but a tough, lean cowboy heading for adventure with his trusty steed. It was the image his publishers worked hard to maintain as well. In his Last Stand, 1890, a cornered bear in the middle of a prairie is brought down by dogs and riflemen, which may have been a symbolized treatment of the dying Indians he had witnessed. Remington's attitude toward Native Americans was typical for the time. He thought them unfathomable, fearless, superstitious, ignorant, and pitiless, and generally portrayed them as such. White men under attack were brave and noble. Through the 1890s, Remington took frequent trips around the United States, Mexico, and abroad to gather ideas for articles and illustrations, but his military and cowboy subjects always sold the best, even as the Old West was playing out. Gradually, he transitioned from the premier chronicler artist of the Old West to its most important historian artist. He formed an effective partnership with Owen Wister, who became the leading writer of Western stories at the time. Having more confidence of his craft, Remington wrote, quote, "My drawing is done entirely from memory. I never use a camera now. The interesting never occurs in nature as a whole, but in pieces." Remington's focus continued on outdoor action, and he rarely depicted scenes in gambling and dance halls typically seen in Western movies. He avoids frontier women as well. His painting Amid Steel, 1897, is a rare instance of indoor cowboy violence. Remington's had developed a sculptor's 360-degree sense of vision, but until a chance remark by playwright Augustus Thomas in 1895, Remington had not yet conceived himself as a sculptor and thought of it as a separate art for which he had no training or aptitude. With help from a friend and sculptor Frederic Remington, Remington constructed his first armature and clay model, a bronco buster, where the horse is reared on its hind legs, technically a very challenging subject. After several months, the novice sculptor overcame the difficulties and had a plaster cast made, then bronze copies, which were sold at Tiffany's. Remington was ecstatic about his new line of work, and although critical response was mixed, some labeling it negatively as illustrated sculpture, it was a successful first effort, earning him $6,000 over 3 years. During that busy year, Remington became further immersed in military matters, inventing a new type of ammunition carrier, but his patented invention was not accepted for use by the War Department. His favorite subject for magazine illustration was now military scenes, though he admitted, "Cowboys are cash with me." Sensing the political mood of that time, he was looking forward to a military conflict which would provide the opportunity to be a heroic war correspondent, giving him both new subject matter and the excitement of battle. He was growing bored with routine illustration, and he wrote to Howard Pyle, the dean of American Illustrators, that he had done nothing but potboil of late. Earlier, he and Pyle, in a gesture of mutual respect, had exchanged paintings. Pyle painting of a dead pirate, for Remington's of a rough and ready cowpuncher. He was still working very hard, spending 7 days a week in his studio. Remington was further irritated by the lack of his acceptance to regular membership by the Academy, likely due to his image as a popular, cocky, and ostentatious artist. Remington kept up his contact with celebrities and politicos and continued to woo Theodore Roosevelt, now the New York City Police Commissioner, by sending him complimentary editions of new works. Despite Roosevelt's great admiration for Remington, he never purchased a Remington painting or drawing. Remington's association with Roosevelt paid off, however, when the artist became a war correspondent and illustrator during the Spanish-American War in 1898, sent to provide illustrations for William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. He witnessed the assault on San Juan Hill by American forces, including those led by Roosevelt. However, his heroic conception of war, based in part on his father's Civil War experiences, were shattered by the actual horror of jungle fighting and the depravations he faced in camp. His reports and illustrations upon his return forced not on heroic generals, but on the troops, as in his Scream of the Shrapnel, 1899, which depicts a deadly ambush on American troops by an unseen enemy. When the Rough Riders returned to the United States, they presented their courageous leader Roosevelt with Remington's bronze statue, the Bronco Buster, which the artist proclaimed the greatest compliment I had ever had. After this, everything will be mere fuss. Roosevelt responded there could have been no more appropriate gift from such a regiment. In 1888, he received the public honor of having 2 paintings used for reproduction on U.S. postal stamps. In 1900, as an economy move, Harper's dropped Remington as their star artist. To compensate for the loss of work, Remington wrote and illustrated a full-length novel, The Way of the Indian, which was intended for serialization by a Hearst publication, but not published until 5 years later in Cosmopolitan. Remington's protagonist, a Cheyenne named Fire Eater, is a prototype Native American as viewed by Remington and many of his time. Remington then returned to sculpture and produced his first works produced by a lost wax method, a higher quality process than the earlier sand casting method he had employed. By 1901, Collier's was buying Remington's illustrations on a steady basis. As his style matured, Remington portrayed his subjects in every light of day. His nocturnal paintings, very popular in his late life, such as A Taint on the Wind and Scare in the Pack Train, are more impressionistic and loosely painted and focused on the unseen threat. Remington completed another novel in 1902, John Ermine of the Yellowstone, a modest success, but a definite disappointment as it was completely overshadowed by the bestseller The Virginian, written by his sometime collaborator Owen Wister, which became a classic Western novel. The stage play based on John Ermine failed in 1904. After John Ermine, Remington decided he would soon quit writing and illustration after drawing over 2,700 illustrations to focus on sculpture and painting. In 1905, Remington had a major publicity coup when Collier's devoted an entire issue to the artist and his art, showcasing his latest works. His large outdoor sculpture of a big cowboy, which stands on the East River Drive in Philadelphia, was another late success. His Explorers series, depicting older historical events in Western U.S. history, did not fare well with the public or the critics. The financial panic of 1907 caused a slowdown in his sales, and in 1908, fantasy artists such as Maxfield Parrish became popular with the public and with commercial sponsors. Remington tried to sell his home in New Rochelle to get further away from urbanization. One night he made a bonfire in his yard and burned dozens of his oil paintings, which had been used for magazine illustration, worth millions of dollars today. Making an emphatic statement that he was done with illustration forever, he wrote, quote, "There is nothing left but my landscape studies," unquote. Near the end of his life, he moved to Ridgefield, Connecticut. In his final 2 years, under the influence of the 10, he was veering more heavily to Impressionism, and he regretted that he was studio-bound by virtue of his declining health, and could not follow his peers who painted plain air. Frederic Remington died after an emergency appendectomy led to pertussis on December 26, 1909. His extreme obesity, weighing nearly 300 pounds, had complicated the anesthesia and the surgery, and chronic appendicitis was cited in the post-mortem examination as an underlying factor in his death. The Frederic Remington House was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1965. Reading that, it was kind of interesting that Remington said that at some point he stopped doing artwork by looking at a photo or a model, and a lot of artists used to do that, and there's really nothing wrong with that, but he had said that he stopped using models and looking at photographs to do his artwork, and instead he started to see the picture in his mind and go from his mind to the drawing board. And I often do that myself. If you can see it in your head, you can definitely put it down on paper, whether it's artwork or it's writing. And you have to have a good photograph or a good artwork to sell your products. And Remington definitely knew this, and I think a lot of other artists know this as well. The problem here, though, today in 2025, is that for artwork specifically, a lot of it is AI generated, computer generated, or it's been altered in some form or fashion, and a lot of these cards do not look good. And it used to be too, whether it was like the 1910s or 1920s, 30s, 40s, or 50s, especially in 1960s, you knew the card or the year the card was issued without having to look at the back of the card, because each year it was unique, and it also represented a piece of the era in which it was printed. And today, I can't tell you, there's nothing distinct about the cards that are issued today. Sometimes they go back to like they try to go back to like the 1960s or 1980s or whatever it is, the Topps heritage, and that's okay. Like, I don't really mind that, but there's still something missing. It's the look, it's the feel that is missing from the cards today, where it wasn't before. And I always suggest people to touch the card, really, and I know it's kind of weird too, but I always smell the card as well, especially a vintage card, because it gives off a certain smell that you can't reproduce, and it tells me that it's a real card and not a reproduction or a forgery. So I know it's kind of strange. Today, though, I think the internet really hurts both artists and writers. And when you're seeing an image on the internet of a piece of art, they almost take it for granted, really, as it's easy, at least in their minds. Hey, this is really easy, and neither being an artist or a writer is easy at all, and they don't make a whole lot of money anymore, just because nobody's willing to pay a lot of money for original art, or even print as well. I mean, some prints are actually kind of expensive, especially like Maxfield Parrish, which I had mentioned before, or Frederic Remington. His stuff can be kind of expensive too, but a lot of people have that sense that when they're looking at me or watching me do artwork, I've done it so long that it makes it look like it's easy. Like, I make it look easy, and I guarantee you it is not. The written word, on the other hand, there's definitely a decline in the way that articles are being published today, and a lot of this has to do with the editors as well, and maybe even the writers themselves. There's a lot of spelling and grammatical mistakes that I've witnessed, and I read a lot of stuff going back to obviously the 1890s, 1880s, and I've noticed over the last 25, 30 years that writing has gone downhill, and articles as well equally have gone downhill. And I think that's either the writer, most likely the editor, is not catching this stuff because they everything is, we need it now, and we need it published now, and information is 24/7 today. But this comes at a cost too. You're putting out inferior products to the public, and the media really needs to put a handle on this. They need to clamp it down, and to be more careful of what they're either A, writing, or B, putting out, where everything is grammatically incorrect or factually incorrect as well. And it's a huge problem. We have such a huge problem in the media to begin with over the last 30, 40 years that it needs to be cleaned up. And so I wanted to get back to Frederic Remington here and the artwork in these cards. There wasn't a whole lot of information that I could find on this set to begin with, and there wasn't no deep dives here that I could see, and really nothing from our founding hobby pioneers. They didn't touch this with a 10-foot pole, I guarantee you. I really didn't find anything out there. But guys, I really wanted to cover this story here today of Frederic Remington and his artwork. And I'm betting that this series was of Frederic Remington's. And somebody at the American Lithograph Company was lithographing them or doing them. And there's got to be some kind of artwork here as well. And we just haven't found it, and a lot of people say that they were, because they were done in limestone or whatever it was, and then transferred, or lithographed stone, and then transferred to the press. That still would require some form of artwork, I would think. But then again, we just don't have this stuff available anymore, and a lot of times artwork tends to be destroyed over time. It's nobody ever thinks that this stuff is valuable, so if it doesn't carry any value, they're gonna throw it out, and I think that's most likely what happened. And the other thing too is we don't have any sheets of these. We don't have any full sheets of T206, T205s, T207s. The full sheets that I definitely know we have is from 1933 and 34 Gaudis, but by that time the process that was used in 1910 for T206, and even for this set here, the T53, that wasn't used. That wasn't wasn't in production at the time. So you can definitely tell the difference between a T206 under the microscope and a 1933 Gaudi or a 1941 play ball. It's completely different, and the dot matrix is completely different as well. If you're afraid of, one last thing, if you're afraid of collecting tobacco cards, not at all, don't. If you're afraid that your cards are going to be trimmed or whatever, don't be afraid of that either. There is a standard size for tobacco cards, and a lot of people don't realize that. And from what I heard growing up was that tobacco cards were they were all shapes and sizes, and nobody cared. Well, they had to have cared. First off, you needed to have a specific shape and size to have the card fit inside the package, and that's where the package dictated the shape and size of the card. You're also dealing too with the size of the press as well. So that also dictated the shape and size of the card. So you know, if someone told you, well, nobody cared about the shape and size of the card back then, and they're all shapes and sizes, that's not true at all. They're just trying to they're kind of lazy about it, and you know, maybe they know that the cards were trimmed and they just want to try to pass it off to the unsuspecting collector, and that could definitely be. And then again, too, is there were a lot of collectors back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and even 60s that they may have trimmed their cards not out of any kind of malice or trying to get one over on the other person, but because there was limited space for the collectors to get these things into albums. And so I could definitely see that, where they had a limited space for that kind of stuff. These cards were not worth what they are now. They weren't even worth, tobacco cards weren't even worth what they were when I was first starting out collecting vintage back in the 1990s. You could pick up T206s for commons for like $5, and Hall of Famers for like 40, right? Sometimes 60, sometimes 30. So today's prices are just out of control, and that's a different story altogether. But again, there's a lot here that I wanted to cover with both the brand and the set, because as far as I know, nobody has really covered this set. I think it's fascinating. Each individual card tells a story on the back, and it's a story that it no longer exists, and it may not have even existed the way Frederic Remington saw it back in the 1880s in 1910. And by that time in 1910, the Wild West was pretty much gone. You know, even the buffaloes. So I think in one of them they mentioned buffaloes, and you know, in 1900 there were only a few hundred buffaloes still around. That species almost went extinct, and it was only through conservation and really hard work to bring back buffaloes, and that was a major source of pride and food for the Native Americans. And the United States Army and the government knew that if they wanted to control the Indian population, they needed to hunt their food and kill it. And it you know, it was wrong. It was wrong then. It was wrong now. I love buffaloes, and I think they're really, really cool. And I did have some buffalo meatloaf once, and I felt kind of guilty about it. It was very tasty. Don't get me wrong, but I felt really guilty afterwards, and that never happens. Like, I don't feel guilty about eating chicken or a cow, but for buffaloes, I kind of I was like, oh man, what am I doing, you know? And anyway, guys, that's a different story altogether, I think. But I really wanted to cover this today, and I'd love to get your input on this. And if you guys collect these cards, and if you have any favorites, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And until the next time, I will talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye.